Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 101, and the conversation took place in Schenectady, New York, when I went up to Union College last September. And I sat down with Dr. Deidre Hill Butler, and she is a fascinating woman. And it was interesting because she had a connection to Nashville. She has done a lot of work with the communities that were displaced from the Nashville flood that happened here many years ago. It was a huge disaster here in Nashville. So we talked about that a little bit. We talked about Afrofuturism, gender equality, and religion and gender. And man, it was just cool. I really dug it. Usual stuff. It's super helpful if you guys go to iTunes and rate and review Hey Human. I know I say it every week, but every week somebody does it, and that's great. So I'm going to keep saying it, hoping that more and more people will take a few minutes and pop on the iTunes, and it's really, really helpful. I am an ad-free podcast thus far, and I am keeping it that way as best I can, but support is great. There's a support button on the Hey Human Podcast website, and there's also an Amazon affiliate portal on the website there on the homepage. If you click on that portal and shop at Amazon like you normally would, and it helps back to Hey Human. So that'd be great if you do that. And social media, Hey Human Podcast, and of course I'm on Twitter, Susan Ruthism, and I'm working on getting the YouTube channel all put together. I have a YouTube channel that has been historically for my musical stuff, and there's just a few videos on there, but I want to start adding more to it. And this episode in particular, when I was up at Union College, Tyler Kane videoed two of the podcasts that I did that did not have an audience, and another one that I did that did have an audience. So I'm going to get those up on the YouTube channel so people can watch. And yeah, check out the links page on heyhumanpodcast.com, because with every episode, anything we talk about that seems to be of substance, or perhaps is a book or movie or a product of something that will make life easier that we reference in the conversation, that's on that links page. And it's a wealth of information at this point. There's so much stuff on the links page. It's pretty cool, as I think. I mean, I put all that stuff on there, so I know what's on there. But, someday when you're bored at work and you just feel like perusing, go check that out. Deidre and I had many things that we referenced in our conversation, and I will put a handful of those things up there on that links page. So it's a good thing to check out. Susan at heyhumanpodcast.com. Feel free to reach out to me there. A lot of cool episodes and guests coming up. I'm really excited for you to hear all of that. And I saw Ready Player One with my friend Ellen last week, and I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. A lot of pop culture references, things from childhood. I really, really enjoyed it. So 2 thumbs up from me for just a good time of a movie. Yeah, so there you go. Little movie review, little information, and now on to the show. Thanks for listening, everybody. Here we go. Welcome, Professor Deidre Hill Butler.
Yes.
Thank you for being on Hey Human.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote it down. Associate Professor for Sociology, Affiliate Gender, Sexuality, Women's Studies, Africana and American Studies, and Sociology of Resilience.
Yeah, that's what I write about, think about. How do Black women keep striving in the midst of a lot of obstacles? Mm-hmm. The intersections of race, class, gender, definitions of them that are limiting. How do they break those definitions, recreate their or reimagine themselves in places that they weren't supposed to be originally, because of historical and political limitations. So I look at that in concrete ways.
In regards to like being picked up from homelands and placed in places that they things like that? Or even, I know you've done work with the flood, National Flood.
Yeah.
Is it more localized to things?
Some things are local. I guess I can start. A lot of them, I'm into stories. I like to, I'm an ethnographer. I like to hear and understand how people see themselves and organize to make social change. So I did a project earlier in my career where I met with Black women who were affiliated with the Black Baptist Church in New England, in the Boston area. And I just wanted to make their lives visible, because often you think about Black religious women, it's a Southern context. You don't think about Black people historically in the New England area. And then often you don't think about them building networks and relationships that are longstanding. And so doing a study where people told their stories, their family genealogies, how they connect with other people, build friendships, navigate working in places that are hostile to them, surviving and thriving through sexual assault and abuse as domestic workers, being the first in various careers. So the study, it was embedded in church life because that's where they felt the most vibrant and appreciated, but it showed that they made a lot of networks over time that were important to them and contributing to the community for themselves and at large. So that was like early on dissertation work. And then I've always done work where I see my life reflected in the political, and I made a choice to partner with someone who had children from a previous relationship and became a stepmother. And usually the idea about being a stepmother is a sinister, evil type of connotation. You see that in media and literature, Cinderella, all these different things. And that wasn't my experience. So I ended up saying, okay, my experience is very different. Let me see if there are other Black women who are in their similar family structures and see how they navigate their family life. And a traditional theme with Black families is to care for people who aren't biologically your own, to have this other mother vibe. And a lot of us stepped into being a stepmother in that way. And so I'm countering like the Cinderella by doing something culturally that's close to me. And the other women were expressing the same thing. So I ended up meeting and building a survey and contacting over 100 women who had this ethic that's culturally grounded in African American knowledge of wanting to care for and be really important in the lives of their partners and their children. And so I ended up I'm writing a book about that and talking about how media depicts Black women who portray the role of stepmothers, as well as getting the stories themselves. And a lot of it, they often talked about their faith being the essential part of trying to say, I want to counter the stereotype of being seen as negative. When I care for it, I'm an important part of children that I didn't birth. And so they would talk about wanting to build friendships with other women who were mothers that cared, either biologically or not, and building newer networks for them to deal with some opposition that happens when society tells you that your role isn't really important. So it seemed to be this triangle effect that I kept on seeing in different places, either people in a religious setting, in a community that they're not acknowledged, New England Baptist women, and then seeing in a role of being in a family where you want to care and you get pushback for that, so being a stepmother. And then, interestingly enough, early in my career, I went to college. I'm from the North and went down south. So I went to Nashville for school. My father graduated from Fisk University. He spoke highly of it constantly. And I wanted to experience Southern life. So I arrived there in the late 80s and just loved the city. Ended up transferring, going other places, but kept in contact with people. And then when I saw this flood on TV in 2010, I was wondering what happened to some of my friends that are living there? What's going on with the city? How has it changed 20 plus years later? And saw that gentrification was happening, and where were the voices of change and resilience, and how were people organizing to maintain their communities or be open to bridging and starting new and renewing community. So I contacted friends of mine, they contacted more friends. People wanted to be recorded and have their stories known. The mayor at the time asked for community members to come out and tell their stories about the flood, and the public library created a digital archive of stories, but not a lot of Black residents came out to tell their stories, to be in the digital archive. So the interviews that I did, I ended up partnering with the public library, so they're part of their digital archive. And we got more stories from families and individuals from the Bordeaux and North Nashville area. A few, but it contributed to a larger number. So I feel like that was important. And at the same time, there were mostly women who were talking about how they connected and organized to rebuild residential associations. So there was a dormant Bordeaux Residential Neighborhood Association that became revived.
It got active again, yeah.
Got active again. There are people who said, oh, I'm not really an activist, or I'm not really that visible in the community, but I feel my faith is pushing me to organize and get resources to my neighbors. And so because of their faith and their sense of resilience and their actions, they started rebuilding their community and welcoming, or at least connecting with newcomers, particularly in Bordeaux.
So when the floods hit, it was really interesting. A lot of the churches came together.
Yes, they did.
And we gathered up, food and water and all this stuff. And I remember driving through some of the neighborhoods that were just decimated. I mean, these are people who, in every sense of the word, they lost everything they owned. Their houses were destroyed. And you drive down the street. It was weird because some blocks, houses were fine, and the very next block, completely totaled.
In the same neighborhoods.
Same neighborhoods, yeah. And people had everything they owned piled up outside, a mess on the yard. And what was fascinating to me and lovely was this sense of joy. I don't know if that comes from losing everything and then having that be a freedom in its own right, but I was so astonished, and it was beautiful to see that these people who had truly lost everything, except for what they had on, were coming together so lovingly, helping neighbor to neighbor, people they may not have ever spoken with.
Yes.
And that was cool.
Yes, and across racial bounds.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Various neighborhoods that maybe not a lot of interaction was taking place.
Sure.
Those bounds were broken and then reconfigured. That sense of joy, I think, that you observed came from a sense of knowing that the material wasn't the important thing.
Right. It creates the tribe again.
Yes.
The tribe, we isolate so frequently within our own pods, our own homes, or our own social circles, that when events like this, any kind of tragedy, it awakens our tribe.
Right.
And then we see each other not as other, but as this...
As similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was important, so what happened with part of my project was I just asked people if they'd share the photos they had taken the days after the flood, and then 5 years later looked at spatially what parts of Bordeaux were renovated. So different parks were rebuilt, different buildings, different institutions, churches, what have you, in the community were rebuilt, and particularly the public library that was the branch in Bordeaux was redone.
Yeah.
And so I ended up having photos, community photos, exhibited in that branch from people who lived in the neighborhood, and it was the first exhibit of the new reopened branch, the Bordeaux branch. And so we ended up having a reception opening where people from the community came and wanted to tell more stories and show more pictures, and so ended up meeting more people to interview and talk with. And they were just like, why are you even interested in talking with us? I was like, because I feel like I'm connected.
Right.
Yeah, because through friendship and relationship, I think it's important that we are, that your stories are told.
Yeah.
And the neighborhood isn't going to look the same. It doesn't look the same from 5 years ago. It's not, 5 years from now.
And
it's great to chronicle that.
It is, as you walk around Nashville with places where the flood impacted the most, and there was definitely an integration. There were families from all different races, and people just functioned together. And they came in, the powers that be, there was a lot of money shoveled in to fix the destruction, and these houses came back up. And suddenly, people who lived there formerly couldn't afford to live there because they became extravagantly
Right.
priced, and
Right.
and as things happen, the people who can't afford those kind of homes get in the
Right.
gentrification,
Right.
which
Get pushed out.
they get pushed out. So now these vibrant communities have become rather pasty with the with the well, I mean, with the hipster East Nashville, and it's
Yeah, I have a good friend who still owns her home. Actually, she was a classmate of mine, and now she's a professor at Fisk. People just walk up to her. She lives around the corner from Oprah Winfrey's father, from his barbershop.
Yeah, his barbershop. Yeah, sure.
And I'll give you $300. I'll give you $350. I'll just walk cash if you want to leave. It's a constant thing.
Yeah.
There's that component. I mean, I'm hopeful that there seem to be so many different community conversations about who has access to what resources, that with the boom of growth in that city, voices that were traditionally not heard will be heard. Because there's so many grassroots efforts for that to happen.
Yeah, I do feel the communication is there. I just hope it's not falling on deaf ears.
Okay. I understand.
Yeah.
Because traditionally that's
what happens.
That's what's happening.
And talk is fantastic. I mean,
right.
the conversation.
Where's the action?
It's action.
It's the action.
That's the important thing.
Right. So, I mean, with the different groups, the residential associations that I worked with, I went to different meetings and saw the elected officials. Councilwomen and men would come and talk, and community members would have these conversations. But the next steps, it's interesting to see how's that going to unfold into policy.
Yeah.
So 5 years from now, what will it look like? I don't know. I mean, the boom is just so. It's extravagant of what's happening.
Yeah, it is. Tribe to me is such a fascinating thing, because I do think that, unfortunately, we are drawn to that which looks familiar and feels familiar.
Oh, totally.
It gives us a sense of ourselves, but I think it's so limiting. There's so much to learn from other cultures and just another voice.
Right.
And the more that this happens, where people get displaced and shoved into these little corners and pockets, we're losing such rich history. It happens with the elderly. It happens with people of color. And I just
it's interesting balance though. There's something to be said about having your enclave or your tribe. There's diversity even within that. Because what I've learned about Bordeaux, there are people that lived there pre-1980s, 1960s. So communities after desegregation, and the city was making changes in the 60s, people moved out. They were middle class, the doctors, the lawyers, the graduates of Fisk, TSU, moved out to Bordeaux. They're like Bordeaux Hills, single family homes, middle and upper class.
Yeah.
But by the 1980s, there was a different class of people moving. They had different apartments, so they had a different income level. And the older guard didn't really know the newer guard of people when the flood hit.
Sure.
So that transformed, even within this enclave, you would think, it's black people in this area. You saw a class divide being cracked a little bit, with more conversations and resources being shared. So that was important. But the change in the next 5 years will be, are there middle-class whites, you mentioned the hipster, East Nashville, coming out to Bordeaux, because you have the highway that gets you into the city pretty easily.
Yeah.
And that was seen kind of as like an urban suburb in a way. And is that going to change as the city gets smaller because of the spiraling of growth?
It's growing so quickly.
So it'll be interesting to see. So that tribe is diverse, even when it's an enclave of people who seem to look like each other. There's a lot of differences happening. So the growth of people coming to Nashville for various reasons. There are some people who've been there for 4 or 5 generations. They have a different take on that. On really, who are these strangers?
Sure.
Who are these people coming?
Sure.
And then how do we build trust? So in a way, the gift of the flood was people who maybe didn't even know each other. Even the event that I had at the public library for the opening, there were people who didn't know each other that came to the event, wanting to talk with me, but we made it more, they were talking to each other about, because they were a block or 2 apart and were impacted in different ways. They could share and talk about resources and community building and where's the next meeting? What can we do the next time to support a new residential community association and build it? So I felt like I ended up being a conduit for people to meet and greet and learn from each other.
Sure.
So as an academic, I think there's a role there to be that middle person, especially seeing myself as a Black feminist who cares about community and community building and the wellness of people in communities, and seeing community as not something stagnant, right? That you're in one location. We're multifaceted people. So I can be a person who lives in upstate New York but cares about Tennessee because there are connections there, because I have relationships there. Yeah. There was a reason why I brought the same or similar exhibit, the Nashville exhibit, to the college like a year later. For about 6 months, the pictures were up in our school library here. So I was just talking about these different communities and images that we have about Black communities, especially during the Black Lives Matter era now, where most of the images that are shown mass media-wise are about the marches or about Black bodies on the street bleeding for 2 and 3 hours, Black male bodies, and it's a negative connotation. But to talk about community building connections of change, to say that we are multifaceted people, right? Yeah. And that needs to be understood. And we can really challenge racist ideologies by showing images of ourselves in our daily lives that are vibrant and contributory.
I think that's such an incredibly poignant thing to say, because our media shapes us. And on average, people watch, 7 hours of television a day or something insane. I don't know if that's right. I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And
studies back you up on that.
It's a placating mechanism, and it's also it's propagandist, right? You're being fed information constantly, even by the regular TV shows.
Right.
So it is a really valid point that the more the media will portray the good, but the good doesn't serve, right? And that's the problem, is you almost have to scream louder about the good stuff, even though it's far more prevalent. That's not to say that absolutely there are bodies piling up that is inexcusable, but there's a lot of really wonderful outreach, like you were saying, and goodness going on. And I wish that was also at the center of the propaganda machine.
Right.
Because I think it begets itself. When people see violence, it begets violence, right? It makes people angry and all that, and as it would, just as joy does. You can't walk around somebody who's smiling or laughing and not laugh and smile yourself, even if you don't know them, even if you don't know what the story is. Right. So that
the joy conquers the trauma, right?
Yeah.
The joy conquers the devastation. And that devastation could be individual, or it could be a community that's gone through major strife.
Right.
So it goes back to that point of how do we construct communities that are more uplifting, supportive of each other. And it starts with just interacting in positive ways and seeing yourself in a positive light. And however that's defined, just showing people that are undergirding and supporting each other for mutual respect, to see yourself in your full humanity and not kept in boxes of these labels that are severely draining, right? And we've kind of had enough of that. So I come from a very postmodern lens. I'm very hopeful. I mean, I feel like I'm an optimist at heart. I see the best and the good in people, and I think the work I seek out tries to see that. And that comes from just my own faith base of saying, there has to be better. We have to do better and treat each other better. And I think I seek out spaces where I see better. And that it has that manifested. So it's constantly, I see community, but I also see the individuals in the community trying to come together to say what's just, what's right, and having some moral compass, and being inclusive about how you define your sense of self and your sense of spirituality, because I think the spiritual really is embedded in all of us, and that we see each other and want to be connected with each other.
Right.
So that's kind of the definitions of resilience come from seeing each other as connected and important.
I just wish that we could, we come together as a whole during tragedy. It would be lovely if in fact, we could come together as a whole during hope and joy and love.
Right.
And,
It was.
and that the news, instead of saying, oh, this, black guy robbed a liquor store and was shot dead, they say, hey, this black guy is helping to get water to clean water here, or is, helping to bring books to kids, or, it's always this negative sells, unfortunately.
Right.
Which is so bizarre to me, because I think as human beings, we want to feel good, don't we?
Right.
I mean, don't we want to feel like things are getting better? And yet it's like a drug or something, where we've got this slow morphine-esque drip of chaos. And then if things look a little good, I don't know if we feel glib about it or something. I'm not really sure what the story is there. But
and it's interesting, the role of media with that. You can put out the positive. We have so many array of choices.
Yes.
Right? And there seems to be a leaning towards the negative in mass media.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm optimistic there too about, being independent, doing projects like this and others where you can just show different.
Spread the joy.
Yeah. Have different perspectives, and I think your tribe will find you in regards to saying, I want to gravitate towards that. I want to see these different stories.
Yeah.
So we have to do the work, keep having people exposed or give them opportunities to see varying, sometimes surprising ways that we are interacting and being very connected with each other.
Yeah.
I think the route I do it is within the academy and teaching courses that constantly look at the history and the contemporary situations of Black people in a general sense, but then also, Black women specifically. But I keep that broad, right? And then I use examples that are current and sometimes historical of how people strive through struggle. And oftentimes needing their support of their communities, and communities defined in broader ways, not just racially or in a gendered lens. So even within looking at the intersections of race and gender, it's broader than that. That's why I really loved working with Robin Reed in the library here with this Afrofuturism exhibit, because Afrofuturism is about reimagining human contact from a Black cultural lens. And so that Black cultural lens is historical, but it's also retooling and saying, what do we look like? How do we define Blackness now so we can see ourselves in the future? Because oftentimes when you think about sci-fi or future conditions, you don't see people of color in that realm. So to have art and music and films. We have this film coming out next month, Black Panther, that people are really excited about.
Yeah,
because it's just the aesthetic.
Yeah,
is so affirming of Blackness in a broad way, but then some concrete lenses, because you see historical affinities with Africa and the diaspora, but then you see leadership and the merging of technology in the future with Black folks.
And even Black superhero.
Totally.
When we, again, back to media, we mirror all the time, right? I say this all the time. And so when you're a small Black kid growing up looking at the television and all the heroes are white, I think that there must be some sort of, not being Black, I can't really speak to it exactly, but philosophically speaking.
Right. You want to see yourself represented in the places where you go. And, and then...
And if you're constantly being told that, they're always the bad guy.
Right.
Then what is that doing
It has an influence
for your psyche? So it's exciting for me to see that movie, and hopefully more to follow, where there are these strong, powerful heroes.
Right.
They're
serving their community and others in a broad spectrum of humanity.
It's exciting.
So you may
even better if he had been a woman.
Exactly. That's coming though. I think that's coming. What's interesting, another point that's important to me is you may not see yourself in media in all different kinds. That's changing slowly but surely.
Sure.
But the spaces where you often did feel affirmed, like church spaces, like your community.
Sure.
Those places in a pre-postmodern world where you saw your role models and your sense of self. And maybe those are fragile or changing. The people don't go to communal settings to worship as much anymore. At least the younger generation doesn't. or you live in communities that are more diverse, you don't really see yourself. Media ends up being a place where you kind of resource yourself to say, I want to see who I am. So that even makes films like the Black Panther, television shows like Black Lightning, just seeing, liking comic books that have characters that look like you, or seeing characters that are in a multicultural setting. So you have friends that may not be with you or look like you, but you have that affinity and that support. That's important. That's an ongoing process. So we're in the midst of a lot of flux. But that's what culture is. It's never stagnant. Right. You can't define it in one way. So we see it spatially with communities shifting and who's living where and what resources are there. But I'm optimistic that if your stories are told and you're in the place, right, you're there saying this is what's important to me and the people I'm connected with, you have to fight for that. There's striving and struggle, but in the end you'll be appreciated in some way. In some way that's important.
Do you find, especially as a teacher, as a professor, do you find that, so as you're moving around the various church groups, obviously there's a strong faith in the room. So as the young people are coming up and you're shaping young minds, are you finding that religion plays a part in the youth that's coming up, since you have this window to all of that? Or is there more of an atheist bent coming up? I mean, there's
a mix. There's a mix, but there seems to be a growth. There's a respect for humanity. There's a respect for being valued. And it gets affirmed in various ways. So the students here may not ask, where do you go to church, but they want to be in a communal setting where they're appreciated. Right, so that setting may be a community, breaking bread meals together, having that as a common ritual. Well, or it could be actually getting a van from the school and going to one of the local churches in the area. Or just trying to have choosing classes where there's small sizes and their voices are heard. There's that constant need to be connected and valued. And so it manifests in different ways. But we have traditional ways. There's a gospel choir group that has grown exponentially. There are like 30 students in the group, and 10 years ago there was 5. And they came from having that as a part of their tradition, and they want to continue that in college. But then we have an interfaith group. So there's students who are atheists and agnostics. They are connecting and dealing with social issues that are Buddhist or Christian, inclusive Christian or not, different perspectives. And that's important. So I think it's like in flux, but you see different pockets. It's not just one way, and that's respected. It's not just tolerated here. I think it's respected and encouraged to just, what is your sense of meaning? Who you are, especially developmentally, kids, young adults who are 18 to 22, 23, they're changing, right? They're figuring out who they are. Young adults in their 40s are changing and trying to figure out who they are. It's a common thing. Yeah. But finding that niche of where you're valued is really important. So it intertwines with feeling valued, seeing that there's some unjustness in your world, and getting your posse or your tribe with you to say, let's challenge that. Yeah. Let's make some change, and then you get the strength to do that because you feel connected and supported from the people that you work with. We had on Martin Luther King Day, we had a social justice march. So we walked from the library to the center of campus, holding signs where people were self-identified as, thanking Dr. Martin Luther King, or saying, I'm part of the LGBTQI community, and I thank Dr. King, or I want to be your friend. Hi, my name is. It's different signs that people wrote to show that there's different issues, but we're coming together to appreciate each other. And then we ended up in the knot, and students who went on a civil rights mini-term, so they went to southern cities, Charleston, Birmingham, Memphis, New Orleans, looked at historical public history museums and locations that were really iconic in the civil rights era, but they made so many connections to today, saying, okay, those are struggles that are perceived to be in the past, but we still need the full hope and destiny of all human beings to be recognized. So immigration issues and other controversial topics were brought up, but you see a legacy it's all there. And then focusing on important leader like Dr. Martin Luther King, who was inclusive and respected all humanity, but came from a religious base, there was that connection there too. That wasn't like if you don't believe, you can't be a part. It was very like, get to know each other. Let's see what's happened in the past and see how we can galvanize and work together in the future. So there's certain events and there's certain times when people do come together to just say, you know, I see you. Yeah. You're important. You know,
John
you're
Lewis
here.
is good at that too.
John Lewis, we love. He was our commencement
so
speaker here in 2010, I believe.
Yeah.
And I got a chance to meet him at a reception. And he was standing by himself for some reason. And I said, hi. And he was like, oh, I said, thank you for your work. And he said, thank you. He's like, you weren't even born. I was like, no, I was not. I was not even thought of when you spoke at the March on Washington. But I just thank you so much. Yeah. And I hugged him. I think I hugged him too much. I just wouldn't let him go. He was so humble and so
He's lovely.
Gracious.
Yeah.
And you're right. So because of that civil rights mini-term, the professor who coordinated that contacted him and arranged for him to be our commencement speaker. So I call that as one of my iconic times of being at Union. And the second time is when we had Dr. Maya Angelou speak here. And I had the privilege of meeting her and introducing her to the campus community and just sitting down with her. And my grandmother had recently passed. But the exchange, I just felt like sitting with her was like sitting with my grandmother again, the same age, but just that whole milieu. And she, during her opening remarks, she thanked me for introducing her. But then she kind of said, well, I have family members in the Schenectady area. And this was my first time ever being invited here. So she was like kind of getting at us for not inviting her before. But just her poetry and her words were inspiring to all. Yeah. And people, it was a fire hazard. People couldn't get into the space. They were just trying to clamor to meet her.
What I love about her is I have a framed Phenomenal Woman that she signed to me on my wall at home, and I read it all the time as a reminder. What I love about her voice is she's like, you be as big and as bright and as whatever you are, and it's beautiful. And that's such, as a female, you know, that's such a, because we're constantly, if you're too loud or you're this, you know, men are not fed those messages the same way at all. They're triumphant, they're bold, and women are, you know, harpy and all this stuff. So it's a nice reminder.
Totally. I mean, that was our exchange. She was like, how are they? She took my arm. We're sitting close like we are. And she's like, Dr. Butler, how are they treating you here? And it was this moment we locked eyes, and I was like, it's okay. You know? And it's just okay. And at that point in my career here, it was just okay. Because it's tough. I'm the first Black woman tenured here at Union College.
Wow, really?
I'm not I was the only on the faculty for the majority of my time here. But there was like-mindedness with other faculty members, affirmation of the courses I was teaching, but still a lot of struggle. So, I mean, and
growth is hard.
Growth is hard. But it was a moment of affirmation from her as this elder mother. Yes. That's how I really perceived our moments together. It was like, she was like, I got your back. I understand what you've gone through or going through, and you'll be okay. Just from that brief exchange. Yeah. So there's been moments where you just get affirmed by the people that you meet. So the John Lewis and Maya Angelou, but I've had dynamic students that have encouraged me. And it's been good.
Sure.
It's been good.
That's so lovely. You said something a little while back. You referred to yourself as Black feminist.
Yes.
And so I'd love to know, what does being a feminist mean to you? And then how is that then one step along the Black feminist, what that means is versus, you know. Yeah.
It's intertwined. It's not either or.
Okay.
You know, feminism is about your voice.
Right.
It's about your collective nature. It's about challenging patriarchy. Right. So women and human beings, their full humanity is respected, understood, claimed. Right. Understanding the history of struggle, but then seeing the celebration and connection of who we are and the breadth of who we are. So I interchanged my feminist lens with my womanist lens. That's another, because that womanist, being a womanist is like you're culturally embedded in African diaspora cultural norms that you celebrate, just ways of knowing, seeing yourself that you love other women of color, and particularly black women. You do, but you also see alliances with others. So you know that there's that mark, but it's not limited by race or class or gender. Try to strive towards building community wherever you are and listening, right, and interacting and respecting other people. So in a manifested way, I mean, I'm involved with certain groups and connections, but just from my soul, I feel defining myself as a black feminist or womanist scholar, activist, mother, all these different labels, partner, it's all engaged with who I am, but how I see the world. That optimism comes from those terms and those connections that I've made through my journey, right? I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't have people connected to me, praying for me, supporting me, encouraging me all along the way. And a lot of my role models and a lot of the people that supported me didn't look like me, right? So I've used or been with my community, but I've always built bridges, right? You have to do that in this world. So a quick definition, black feminism, black womanism, feminism in general is really challenging the limits that society places on human beings, right? We want to have a just world. We want power dynamics to be egalitarian and supportive. How does that get manifested with healthcare? How does it get manifested in the media's images of who we are? Needs to be challenged, in the workplace, in all different settings. It's an ongoing struggle, right? Do we ever get to that beloved community that Dr. King talks about? It's a process, right? It may not be an end definition or a place.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm curious. So the Black Lives Matter movement,
yes.
Why, and even the kneeling movement, why do you think it is that, for example, the Black Lives movement, they said, people that are for that movement are against, there's always that rhetoric. And even with Colin taking the knee, which, how anyone can bastardize that and turn that into being unpatriotic because of the anthem.
Actually, it's extremely patriotic. It's to counter,
100% patriotic.
To make sure that democracy is functioning for all.
For all,
And
yes.
actually, when you look at black experiences or marginalized groups' experiences, it challenges the tight, cohesive idea of what democracy is supposed to look like. So it ends up being, it's strengthening, at least from a nationalistic, American nationalistic perspective, who we say we are. We say we're land of the free, home of the brave, and then you're chastising, you're marking, you're dislocating large groups of people.
Yes.
Historically and in contemporary times, that needs to be challenged. That's part of the process.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be negated. Just because you may have privilege and power doesn't mean that all does.
Yeah.
And so that social consciousness is one that makes you see, okay, I may have this, but who doesn't? Who's not at the table?
How powerful the media is and able to change the dialogue. Because it went from, this is somebody who has a voice.
Right.
And that frustrates me too when people are like, sports people and famous people and all these people shouldn't talk about politics. They're the very ones who should speak about politics because they are they are for the masses. Everyone is listening. If not them, then who? If they can't use their position and their power for good, then who?
Right. And some of them don't want that position.
Sure.
But there's a long history of black athletes using their privilege and their positions of influence to call for social action.
Yeah.
Because I understand that they're in positions that people will listen to them.
Sure.
And they use the stereotype of the black athlete in a way that benefits not just themselves, but acknowledges their hard work, but also the communities where they come from. So I think that...
But it's always vilified,
It's always vilified because it's a challenge of
the norm,
and how racist ideologies and practices are really embedded in the American culture overall. And you do take a personal hit for that. But I think Colin Kaepernick was very aware. But he has a tribe with him now, or he has support.
He's
with him.
strong.
It's part of the strategy.
He's a superhero. For me, I think that there is a great example of a superhero that young children can look to.
I agree.
Yeah. And a real one, not one that's written into a script somewhere.
One that's living right here. Similar to the John Lewis situation.
John Lewis is absolutely a superhero.
They did comic books. He's at Comic-Con wearing his trench coat and backpack from the Civil Rights Movement to say kids need to realize, and young adults, and even adults, because most of the people that read graphic novels are adults. They see him and superhero mentality.
The March trilogy, for those of you listening, please, I highly recommend it. Yeah, get it. It's fantastic. Right. Also have tissues on hand because you will cry. I cried at least.
Exactly. So just using media in a way to show different depictions and what's a superhero, right? Yeah. It's the people that are making those challenges and those changes on a constant basis and collaborating, connecting with others. It sounds a little lofty, but we can make change in your own way. For Colin Kaepernick, taking a knee was his way.
Yes.
What's your way? What are you doing in your way to say that you're connected to exactly
my podcast? This is my way. Yeah.
And I guess being a scholar is mine.
Yes.
And a community member that's engaged and caring is mine. Because usually scholars just care about working on their books and everything, but the academy kind of tries to keep you isolated. I can't function like that as a Black feminist scholar. I have to be connected to the communities that I'm writing about, talking with. It's just, it's who I am, but it's the way I do my work.
Yes.
And so there's trials and tribulations with that, because the institution may not respect the community work, but I have to do it because that's how I got here. That's who I am.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's so many questions.
No,
I know.
This is great.
What's happening next? So you have a book coming out that you're working on.
I'm working on the book about the stepmothers, and then it's interviews, and then it's media depictions. So looking at a lot of 1990s TV shows had some stepmoms in there, and I'm like coding and examining those for representations. Mm-hmm. So that's a book that's coming out next year. What's another project? There was the Afrofuturism project.
That's
working
cool.
on an article for that. Then I'm doing a project about Prince, a collected volume for the Journal of African American Studies. We're doing a collection of people talking about Prince and his healing abilities through his music and the lyrics and just the structure of the music that he did, or it still does. I mean, it's still with us in a lot of ways. So collaborating with some other people who appreciate his art on that.
And he's a good example of an activist and he did a lot of stuff anonymously. So he didn't use his fame, but he used his financial power.
Yes, he did. Especially fueling some of the early Black Lives Matter endeavors. He gave money.
And I don't think people know a lot about that.
No. Who was in detail? Van Jones was talking about how he was like a middle person to get resources to certain families and things like that, using Prince's resources. Another superhero.
Yeah.
So that's what's on tap for me right now. So the book, Afrofuturism work, Prince.
Well, I'm gonna put links on heyhumanpodcast.com of anything you want people to get into. Just email me. I'll put all the links up.
Will do.
Dr. Hill Butler, you are awesome. I am so happy that there are people like you, out there in the world and spreading knowledge and powerful thought. It makes me very happy.
I appreciate this conversation. Yeah. It's great to share.
Thanks for being on Hey Human.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.